Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Nice to be back. So today we're going to take on a pretty sad subject. We're going to talk about cancer, unfortunately. Okay. So hopefully you folks won't be too depressed by the time we get to the end. What I want to do, I want to display this PowerPoint, not that one. There we go. That's better. Okay, this one is more relevant. It's up to date. I've got a few computer challenges going on. So just to remind you that we have a midterm exam coming up in the future. And there is a sample exam on Canvas. In the files folder, you'll find a past exam. So that exam has both the questions and then there's an answer sheet as well with all the answers. So please, it's time now to start looking at that so you can prepare for the midterm exam. Look at that, ask questions of yourself, find out where the answers lie in the reading materials and the slides, and see if you do well. If you do, there's nothing to worry about. The exams are not worth that much compared to other courses. So I would worry even less should you have any concerns, all right? So try it out in the next couple of weeks, see how you do, all right? So let's get on with this. Let's make this a bit smaller. There we go. So the underlying theme, the biological theme, is to learn about how DNA synthesis takes place inside cells. All living cells have to copy their DNA before they divide into two. That's just the mathematics of cell division, right? So say you have $100 and you're going to divide into two. Well, you could just keep the $100 and get $50 to each of your daughter cells, right? When you split in two. But then every generation, your value will decrease. So what you have to do is when you get permission to divide, you'll take your $100, make a copy of that. So you now have $200 and then separate the $200 evenly into two sides of the same cell and then divide down the middle. And now the new cells will have $100 each. So understanding how that process works is important. So that's called mitosis. Its cousin is called meiosis. And what we'll do is we'll discuss meiosis later. So maybe in the next chapter, as we start next week, we'll look at meiosis, all right? Because it's a bit more complex. Before we move on, let's do a quick review of what happened in the previous chapter. So in chapter 5, we were looking at climate change. And these are the takeaways, right? So what was the real main concern with climate change? So you have 6 answers there. So if you don't mind, pick what you think would be the most appropriate answer from this list of 5 choices. So here we go. So this is a question. What was the real main concern with climate change today? And that gives me time to check the chat. Yeah, I'll go over that again, where the practice exams are, all right? But just focus on this question, please. Okay, let's see what the student responses are. So what's the main concern that we humans have at this time with climate change? So the answer is the rate of change, right? the speed at which things are changing. So that's the takeaway. So if somebody was to ask me in the middle of the street, hey, what's the main problem with climate change? I would say, well, it's the speed at which things are changing. The Earth tends not to like such a rapid change. And 200 years is really, 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 really fast, right? To see these numbers change that quickly. In human lifetime, that's not very significant. But with respect to the age of the Earth, it is one of the fastest increases that you can have, all right? Okay, thank you so much for that. So now we're going to focus our attention on the chapter at hand. We're going to look at cancer. So I decided that we will look at patterns first, right? So the best way to learn about cancer is to look for patterns, not just in the biology that we'll see a bit later, but also in the statistics. So to get an idea of what's going on. So in the next few slides, look for these patterns, and I'll be asking you to comment on that. So let's start with this one, right? So this was the latest data that we collected in 2020, a year and a half ago. And you can see we can have a pattern, right? So the number of new cases of cancer diagnosed in 2020, you can see right in the middle of the graph, right? Males, 900,000, females, 900,000, right? But, you know, a difference of about 20,000 between the two. So males and females get cancer in approximately the same rate, approximately the same rate. But then look at the sexual differences, right? So men have certain organs that females don't have, and vice versa. So males have a prostate and females have larger breasts, right? Females also have uterine tissue. Males have testicular tissue. So those differences aside, there are many areas that have similar levels of cancer. Look at lungs, right? So lungs is about 13%. It's about 13% on the other side. Colon cancer in males, 9%. Females, about 9%. So that tells you that for most regions of your body, they are independent of hormones. So hormones are not the key factor in the presence of cancer or the initiation of cancer, right? But there are also some differences. And if you look around, you will see that melanoma is more common in males than it is in females by almost twice as much. So how can you explain that? Is that to do with the male hormones, the testosterone? Or do you get protection from estrogen? Or could it be something else? What do you think? So think about males and females in general in the United States. Is there a reason why we should have almost twice as much melanoma in males than females? So what do you think? Think outside the box. Any suggestions? What I'm looking for is, do you find that males work outdoors more than females? So they're more exposed to the sun as part of their lifestyle, right? Or do you think females wearing makeup, sometimes that makeup may prevent their skin from being exposed to the same level of sun as the unmade skin of males? Could be. How about maybe females wear more clothing than males, right? Maybe, maybe not, right? So that's the kind of stuff that cancer scientists will start to think about. Why are we seeing more melanoma in males than in females? Okay, so Jasmine says that males don't tend to put on sunscreen as often as females, right? Yeah. So again, there could be many reasons. So unless you investigate, you do a scientific investigation, then you're left with a bunch of options, right? Scenarios that may or may not be true. The main reason is men tend to work outdoors more in general than females. Think about it. Even though today we're getting more and more construction workers that are female, they're still the minority by far, right? And most farmers are males, and female farmers are beginning to increase in number too. So that kind of attitude, right? That kind of lifestyle change. And when we go to countries where females traditionally work outdoors, then their level of melanoma will be higher than males. So you can see, you can normally explain things as related to the environment. So the environment will be very important as we go forward today, right? And the last thing is, at the bottom, you can see about 22% of cancers, 1/4 almost, are unrelated to these bucketed versions of cancer, right? Now, let me tell you from the onset, right? Because this is something that you mustn't forget. Cancer is just a bucket of diseases that share something in common, but they are different diseases, right? So when we say lung cancer, there's many types of lung cancer, many types. In fact, two people's cancer is not identical. You could have two twins that get lung cancer, right? But when you investigate them at the genetic level, what went wrong with the DNA, you will find that there are differences. In fact, even worse than that. Listen to this. The longer you wait to get your cancer seen, the more diverse your own cancer becomes inside your own body. The cancer over here, if it's spreading to over there, this side of the cancer may be genetically different than the cancer that's spread to your other shoulder. Therefore, it makes it harder to treat because the chemistry of the cancer is different. And maybe the chemotherapy will kill the cancer in your left shoulder, but not your right shoulder. So the sooner you discover your cancer, the more genetically similar it'll be, and the more likely it's going to respond to the treatment. So most of us are scared of lumps and bumps. We want to ignore them, right? But that's the worst thing you can do. It may cost $30, $40 to get it seen by a doctor initially, but it may cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars to get it treated as a cancer, and it will impact your life. If those patients that go through chemotherapy, just like COVID, long COVID, they also have lingering side effects. So you don't want to go through chemotherapy because it's going to change you. Because as we'll learn on Thursday, chemotherapy is a poison that is embedded into your body to kill the cancer before it kills the patient, right? So we have a lot to learn. So let's not jump ahead too much because all these facts are coming out and it'll just confuse us, right? Let's carry on with this analysis. So here's the next set of data. So this is a timeline, right? So between 1975 and when the data was stopped in 2016, you can see that if you look at the rate of cancer, it's more similar today than it has been in the past. And there was a hotspot in the 1990s where cancers in males skyrocketed before dropping back down. So again, there's a pattern there, right? So between the two sexes, yes, males have had more cancer in the past than they have presently. And then also cancer rates have changed a lot in males compared to females. They fluctuated more. So in the 1990s, what happened that led to increase in male cancers? Now think about this too again outside the box. Ready? Could it be that there's a reason why males had more cancers? Or as we discovered in the last chapters, maybe the technology for detecting cancers became better. Could it be a combination of the two? Maybe prostate cancer became better detected in the 1990s. Therefore, more and more males were diagnosed with prostate cancer and before they died of something else. Because prostate cancer in general is a relatively slow growing cancer. So if you get it in your 80s and then you die of heart disease or something else, then it doesn't get recorded as that the patient died of prostate cancer. They died of heart disease. So that's going to affect the statistics, right? So you see how complex the planet with creatures is. It's not a simple analysis, right? So yeah, our ability to detect male cancers increased. Therefore, there's a spike. And then our advice to the male population was to check yourself for prostate cancer. And therefore, once they started doing that over the next few years, the level of prostate cancer began to drop again. Okay. And the other trend that's going across this graph, the slight rise and then the plateau and the dropping down, is to do with smoking, right? Smoking campaigns became successful, and fewer and fewer people in this country were smoking. So that had an impact. So most of that change there you see is from cigarette smoking, right, being banned by the American system. We see the same trends in other countries. Unfortunately, in the Far East, smoking is still not taboo. It's still considered to be groovy, right? Cool, whatever they want to call it. So now you know, you see that? So now you know that prostate cancer was the big one that caused that general spike. So this data is for males, and you'll see that for most cancers, there's a decline in the more recent decades. And that's because our ability to treat cancers and diagnose cancers is getting better. And public information about getting to the doctor early is important, right? Okay. So people, they also change their habits. So again, one more time, what are we talking about? Look at the title. This is the incidence of cancer, right? Incidence, that means cancer is being detected. So it's not deaths from cancer, it's the number of people that have been diagnosed with that type of cancer. This chart doesn't tell you the deaths. That will be a different data set, right? So here you can see a general decline in lung cancer, colon cancer, and you can see a decline in prostate cancer. So those are the result of education programs. Yes. Get yourself checked early. If you have a family history, change your diet, right? Yeah. So interventions can work. Don't smoke. Don't do things that will lead to the cancer, right? Don't eat red meat. Eat more vegetables, stuff like that. But there's also an increase in other cancers, unfortunately. Melanoma has been steadily rising, and so has thyroid and liver cancer. How can we explain those? Well, we can explain those in many ways because there's not a simple answer. But for the most part, people are eating foods that contain a lot of chemicals, artificial chemicals, right? Pesticides, insecticides, and other kinds of stuff, herbicides. And they build up. And also there's a buildup of plastic in the environment, and that plastic can have an effect on the incidence of cancer. So the world is becoming slightly more polluted than it was 20, 30 years ago. All right. So those are the explanations that the scientists give us. Let's look at females. So again, you can see some cancers have risen, right? So you can see thyroid cancer and melanoma have been rising, but other cancers have been falling. So colon cancer, and then even breast cancer compared to the 2000s, right? It has become slightly lower, but it's still significant. Then the next pattern is, why are certain tissues in the body, so prostate and breast, why are they more likely to develop cancer? Well, the answer is any tissue that's growing rapidly or has a turnover, a rapid turnover, will lead to more chance of developing cancer, right? And also the amount of tissue that you have in your body. If it's made of 1 trillion cells versus 100 trillion cells, well, there's a bigger chance that the 100 trillion cells will develop more cancer than the 1 trillion cells, right? So it's to do with absolute numbers too. All right, so the final thing is men can also get breast cancer. So if you go to a breast cancer clinic, every now and again you see a male, because males have breast tissue too, not as significant maybe as females, but they still do. And let's have a final look at one last thing, right? Ethnicity and race. Does your genetic background, does your cultural background have an impact on the rate of cancer? Does your diet, which is part of your culture, have an impact on the rate of cancer? And the answer is, well, let's have a look. So these are non-Hispanic whites, right? Males and females. And they tend to have quite a high level of cancer, right? Incidence. Then these are non-Hispanic people of a Black ethnic background, right? And you can see females have less cancer than non-Hispanic whites, but males have more cancer than non-Hispanic whites, right, in the Black population. Then these are people from the Far East, right, and in the Pacific Ocean, and they tend to, in general, have the lowest level of cancer of the main ethnic groups. Why? Well, they tend to eat a lot more. They tend to eat a lot more seafood. They also consume a lot more. Sorry about that. They also tend to consume a lot more vegetables, varieties of vegetables. So they, in general, have less meat in their diets, except more recently, right? In the last 20 years, the consumption of meat has gone up. But we won't see those effects for a couple of decades. And then we have the native populations, right, of the Americas, and they tend to have lower cancer than other parts of the world, right? And then we have the Hispanic population. And so the Hispanic population is a mixture of Europeans and Native Americans, right? So they have their own level of cancer. In almost all cases there, you can see males are higher than the males are higher than the females, right? Except in the Pacific Islands. Now, I did mention something about genetics a few minutes ago. So let me give you an example of what I mean. The incidence of lung cancer. No, let me change that. Let me go for a different example, an easier example that's supported by lots of data. Let's go to Japan, right? So in Japan, there's very, very low breast cancer, but very high stomach cancer. So stomach cancer, breast cancer. In America, it's the opposite. Very high breast cancer and pretty low stomach cancer. So what's responsible for that? The geography of the planet? Well, let's investigate some true stories. When Japanese migrants left Japan and they moved to Hawaii, yeah, their level of stomach cancer dropped to match the levels in the United States within one generation. So the kids, their level of stomach cancer matched the American, but their level of breast cancer increased within one generation to match the American. So all it takes is one generation of living in this country, then you become like this country. And the same thing applies all around the world. So that tells us that it's less genetic, the ability to get cancer, right? And more environmental. You see how that works? If it had taken many, many, many generations for these Japanese migrant families to have the level of breast cancer in this country, then it would have been the other way around. It would have been more genetic and less environmental. So studies like those have opened our eyes to the way that cancer works. I think the highest rate of breast cancer in America is in Sausalito, which is north of San Francisco, right? The women there have the highest rate in the country of any county. Why? We have very little idea. Could it be pollution in the mountains? Could it be the quality of the water coming down the hills that they use to drink? It could be a lot of factors, right? It could be their diet, could be their genetics. No, it can't be their genetics, because a lot of people have moved there. And when they move there, after a couple of generations, the level of breast cancer increases. So it has to be the environment. But what is it about Sausalito that causes people to have the highest level of breast cancer? So those are studies that are being conducted right now to determine why, by UCSF and Stanford University, right? They want to know those answers. So let's make this lecture a bit more personal, right? So let's start with this question, please, if you don't mind. The results would be just for me to look at, so I won't share them with the class. So nobody will know who's answering. So just for me, and I don't know who's answering either. I won't look at the data. So please answer this question. Have you had an encounter with cancer? Yes, yourself, a close relative, a friend of the family, or yourself, or you know somebody in the community, right? Or no, you don't have any of those answers. So looking at the data, all right. So I'll tell you, about 1/4 of the class have so far answered no, but 60% of the class have answered with a close relative, right? So that's where the data stands right now. Okay. So we'll stop the poll because I got my data. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to have a quick classroom discussion, not a breakout room discussion, just a discussion right here in the chat and on the microphone. Let me start the conversation. I don't think it's a secret that my wife has had cancer 3 times, right? Breast cancer 3 times. And she's still with us. So that's fortunate, right? We have had other family and friends, not just family and friends that have passed away from breast cancer, right? My mother-in-law, my wife's mother, passed away from breast cancer a few years back. And then her mother had breast cancer. So we were suspicious. Could my wife have inherited a gene that predisposes you to getting cancer? So they did a check at Stanford and they found, yes, she has one of the genes. And so that's, concerning, especially when you have children yourself. Then we had another story very quickly, as somebody else who married into her family. So they married in, they weren't part of the family. They developed breast cancer in their 30s. And then they came to us, they came to my wife and said, oh, you survived, help me survive. But unfortunately we couldn't, because like I said, breast cancers are different, right? And the treatment that my wife got didn't work for that other person. So my wife, after the other person passed away, my wife had survivors, right? Why did I survive? Why didn't that young mother survive, right? So things like that can play with your mind. But one last thing, we tend to forget about the people around the patient, right? Yeah, the patient is important because they have the disease. But with cancer support systems, the caregivers also get impacted, right? So it can be devastating. But the 3rd time she was diagnosed, we both became numb. We really didn't care anymore, right? Yeah, let it do what it wants to do. We've had a good chance, and we're just fed up with it. So, and that's exactly what we're seeing with COVID, right? And people are getting fed up. So you can imagine what happens. You live so long with the threat of something that you become numb to it, right? So let's see what you have in the chat. So nobody's put anything down. I'm not sure what's happening with your clicker, Alexia. I haven't. If anybody else is having problems with their clickers, could you share with Alexia what's going on? I know she direct messages me, but I can't answer that. But other people can. So I'll ask others to help you. Thank you so much. She said it. I'll just read what she says. Clicker keeps kicking me out, and I keep having to rejoin. So if you can help her with that problem, please do in the background. But let's get back to the topic, right? So we have somebody sharing. My cousin had lung cancer. She had been in remission for about 5 years now. Right. All right. So the word remission is very important. We don't use the word cure with cancer. Even with my wife, right? She's been around more than 12 years now. The last time she had been diagnosed with cancer. So the doctors keep using the word remission. Remission simply means that at this point, there is no sign that her cancer is present in her body. It may be, cancer cells can hide. That's what happened to my mother-in-law, right? She had lung cancer. No, she didn't, sorry. She had breast cancer when she was in her 40s, I think. And then they took care of it. But unfortunately, when she was in her 70s, 10 years ago, it came back. Breast cancer came back. And it was in the lungs. And that's what took her life, right? So the breast cancer grew in her lungs and became metastasized. So that was rather sad, right? So with my wife, we know that could happen too. But every year that goes by, the probability of it coming back drops. But she would never, ever, unless there's a new technology, ever be said to be cured. Although, hang on a second, I did hear the word cured with cancer 3 weeks ago when I was looking at this research study. Yes. So there were these patients, 5 of them, on the brink of death because nothing was working for their cancer. They were then sent to this research company that was experimenting with new drugs, the last resort. And guess what? All 5 patients have been now alive for over 5 years. And the scientists used the word cured in their paper for the very first time. And they brought it to the attention of the reader. We don't normally use the word cured, but I think in this case, we had a legitimate reason to use that word. Cured means that your cancer's gone. How did they do it? Well, they used the latest technology that we'll talk about on Thursday, right? I'll share that with you. So there's lots going on in the world of cancer, mostly because of money being invested into research. You know, the moonshot that Obama and Joe Biden started, well, that moonshot has been running longer and longer than that, but they did inject money into this. And hopefully if President Biden gets his way, there would be more money injected into this problem in the short term, right? So President Biden, his goal is in 30 years to reduce deaths from cancer to less than 50% of what they are today. And I think personally, the way that science is going, the scientific community, I think that's going to be true. I think that we're going to succeed. We may even get better numbers than that, right? Okay, so let's go back to the chat. Okay, so somebody was diagnosed with breast cancer that spread to her liver, but is responding extremely well to treatment, and the masses are going away. Wow, that is very good news, right? And I suspect that's got to do with some of the newer treatments that they have. Yes, because the old treatments, say 25 years ago, when my wife had her first episode, 25 years ago. Once it had spread into another organ, then it was basically hospice care, right? In those days. But in her case, it hadn't spread, but the doctor thought it had because they had some lumps and bumps in other places that they thought were cancerous until the biopsies came back, and they weren't, right? So the doctor said, this is, he was a consultant in England, because this is the first time in my life that I've given a patient bad news and then had to take it back. Yeah, yeah, it was a roller coaster that 2 weeks, right? So I'm really glad, right? So there's more and more hope, right, for people that with advanced cancers that would have been a death sentence in the past. Now it's not so much. So I'm so glad that's going on there, Dominique. All right, let's have a look. Alexia says one of her grandparents passed away from prostate cancer, because prostate cancer is a slow cancer, right? And the symptoms are very, very hard to detect, because it happens so gradually. Your body just acclimatizes, right? Gets used to it. Yes, so that is the problem with prostate cancer and many slow-growing cancers, right? The patient doesn't realize there's something wrong until it's too late. So our sympathies go with you there, young lady, right? Victoria? So grandmother passed away from pancreatic cancer. So quickly, there's a few types of cancers that are very aggressive. Why are they aggressive? We're not sure. It could be that the cells from which those cancers originate, those cells are very sophisticated, right? They have some unusual properties, and we'll talk about that later. And so the three types of cancer that are very dangerous at the moment are glial cancers, the cancer that John McCain died of, the cancer that the president's son died of, right? Beau Biden, and Senator Kennedy, right? So those cancers are very aggressive. Once they get diagnosed, the hope of curing those in the past was not that good, although things are changing into the future. So that's one type of cancer, right? That's not good news to have. The second one is pancreatic cancer, right? We know what happened to Alex Trebek of Jeopardy fame, right? He had pancreatic cancer, although he did really well, right? He survived over a year. So that was unusual, because most patients don't. So pancreatic cancer, once it spreads, it's very hard. Even if it doesn't spread, once you have it, it's very hard to control. And the third one is esophageal cancer, the pipe that takes food down to your stomach. So once that's diagnosed, it's very difficult to cure those patients, right? So those are the hardest to treat cancers. But all the other cancers, there's good news. Melanoma, breast cancer, liver cancer, kidney cancer. Well, which part of your body cannot get cancer? Well, the answer is every part of your body has a potential to get cancer. So your bones, they're made of cells and material, they can get cancer. Every tissue in your body is made of cells, so those cells can go awry. So what do cancers share in common? The one thing they share in common, i.e. they belong to the bucket of cancer, is that they grow out of control. Cells who grow out of control, we call them cancerous cells. That's it. Whereas normal cells, they only grow when they're asked to grow by the body. So the body is like a committee, right? A committee of 75 trillion cells. Yes, that's what you are. You're a community of cells. And different cells, they talk to each other in this chemical soup in which they exist inside your body. So if you have been drinking in the last few weeks and your liver has lost some of its cells due to alcohol, right? Your liver has now decreased in size compared to the rest of your body. And the rest of the body says, oh, there's not enough liver for the rest of the body. So we're going to send a signal to some of the liver cells to reproduce, right? To grow in size and split in two. Now we have two liver cells where we had one before. But the liver will only respond to that signal for the duration of the signal, right? So over the next few days, some of your liver cells will receive a signal from the outside. They will stop behaving as liver cells temporarily, right? Just those cells, not the whole liver. And they will undergo cell division. Cell division will generate new liver cells from the original cells. And those cells will increase in size once they are, I was going to say born, but they're not born. Once those cells are produced, they will increase in size, and then they'll go back and behave like liver cells. And now your liver has grown in size back to the size it should be for the community of cells to be happy. And then the liver will no longer be asked to continue to grow. The permission to divide will be withdrawn. And now your liver will be the right size. But if you have one of those cells and the liver become defective, then it will grow and grow and grow and grow without receiving any input from the outside. And you can't tell it not to grow. So the only thing that's left, there's two safety mechanisms, right, that will kick in. Yeah, it's like having a naughty citizen, right? You know, the police come and they arrest and they do whatever detention, right? So in your body, if a cell misbehaves and it starts to grow out of control, there are two avenues that will prevent it from becoming a cancer. One, the cell will commit suicide. Yeah, think about it. If a cell begins to misbehave, its inbuilt suicide program kicks in. You are misbehaving, you cannot be allowed to live. And that cell will commit suicide, biochemical suicide, right? It will destroy itself from inside out. So it doesn't become a problem for the rest of the body. We'll talk about that in the future. But if a cell escapes that, it doesn't kill itself, then the immune system, your immune system, your white blood cells, some of them are evolved to scan the body constantly for rogue cells. And when they come across this rogue cell that hasn't killed itself, but is trying to grow out of control and is producing baby cells, which are also trying to grow out of control, right? The immune cell will kill that cell because it recognizes there's something wrong. So every hour, we have about 10,000 cells. Every hour of your life, day and night, you have about 10,000 cells on average that are going rogue, that haven't killed themselves. Then it's up to the immune system to find them and destroy them. If those cells escape that level of detection, then they are going to become a problem. Then there's no other mechanism that will detect them and destroy them. They're now on their way to becoming a tumor and then possibly a cancer. So the longer the cells are inside you, the longer you live on this planet, the more likely mathematically that some of your cells will go wrong and develop into a cancer. Therefore, cancer is normally an old person's disease, right? Normally an old person's disease. Not always, because children can get cancer too. But normally, on average, it's an old person's disease because those cells have been sitting around, like bone, you know, the bone cells. They've been sitting there for decades, and they may be sustaining damage to their DNA. And that damage is building up until they become naughty and start growing out of control. Right. So let's have a look. Last one, acquaintance that had colon cancer. His colon cancer was removed. He's on chemotherapy, stage 4, has amazing outlook. Well done. Yeah, you have to, right? Because if you don't, what's the alternative? It's not good. So Diane, I'm so happy that your acquaintance is still around, right? So surgery is a way of removing the tissue that contains these rogue cells. So once they're out of your body, hopefully you take them all out and you don't leave any behind, and then the body will be clean, right? So that's it. Good. So I could talk all day about cancer because, you know, it affected me, and I learned as much as I could. But most people are very scared of cancer. It's one of those illnesses that you don't, you know, in the old days when I was at university, I used to listen to the BBC. They didn't use the word cancer. It was taboo. this actor died after a long illness. That's what they will say. And we knew what that meant. Long illness meant cancer in most cases, right? But they wouldn't use the word cancer. Now they do. You know, they'll tell you this politician died of cancer, right? But they didn't tell you in the old days. That was a taboo subject. All right, so let's get on the, oh my God, we spent so long just talking about cancer. Well, that's the whole point of this class, is that we have more knowledge than we came in, right? So we're going to go through a whole bunch of stuff in the next lecture and a half. And the process is to get you more educated about cancer, because the chances are very high that somebody around you will either now or in the future have to deal with this, right? So they may come to you and say, hey, what do you know about this? So in a nutshell, if you've been listening to me for the last 45 minutes, what I've been telling you is that cancer is a disease where all the cells are out of control. They're growing out of control. That's what it is, okay? Now, can only certain creatures get cancer? Yes, keep that in mind, right? So single-celled creatures, like an amoeba or a single bacteria, they can't get cancer because they're only made of one cell. In fact, most creatures on this planet are made of one cell. So cancer, it doesn't apply to them. If you're a bacteria and you're growing out of control, then you're growing really fast. And that's all it is, right? So cancer applies to creatures that are made of themselves a lot of cells. So plants, all plants are made of a lot of cells, and all animals are made of a lot of cells, right? So those two kingdoms of life, by definition, are multicellular. But can plants get cancer? Can plants get cancer? That's the question, right? And the answer is, well, what is cancer? So until you understand that term, then you can't come and apply it to these two kingdoms of life, right? So animals can definitely get cancer. We have evidence of dinosaur bones that were fossilized and they had cancer growing inside. They're little, like bulbs of bone sticking out the side. So that told us that that dinosaur may have died of cancer, or it had cancer when it died, right? So cancer is not anything new. There are also creatures that get lots of cancer. The Tasmanian devil, right? Their population is crashing because so many of them have cancer. Why? We're not sure. Something in the environment. There are also creatures that never get cancer. There are animals that never get cancer, right? I think the one that comes to mind is the elephant shrew. The elephant shrew is like a small mouse. It never gets cancer. Why is it called an elephant shrew? Because its nose is quite long, right? That's all it is. Nothing to do with an elephant. So that creature never gets cancer. And I heard of another one recently, right? I forgot the name, but there's some oddities out there in the world of animals. But all other animals get cancer, including humans, right? So what about plants? Well, plants can develop tumors, right? But they can't develop cancer. So keep that in mind, and we'll understand what the difference is between a tumor and a cancer, right? So any kind of extra growth of cells, extra growth, more than the organism wants, is called a tumor, right? So tumors are present in both plants and animals. Okay, so just extra cells growing when they shouldn't be growing, right? That's all it is. So here's a tumor that was taken out of this patient, and the doctor didn't know the patient had a tumor. They were just doing some liposuction. And it's a rather large patient, right? Morbidly obese, as we learned in the previous chapter. And to save the patient from medical issues, they decided to remove some of the fat from the abdomen. But when they went into the abdomen to remove the fat, they found this, a basketball-sized tumor. Now, the patient was healthy. The patient was alive. Didn't have any signs of any kind of disease, other than being overly obese, right? So you can live with large tumors. Not desirable, but you can. It depends on where the tumor is, right? If the tumor is in your brain and you have something that big, it's not going to be good news, right? Because it's going to push against your brain. tissue and make you non-functional. If it's in your neck, it may stop the blood flow to going to your brain, right? If it's on your heart, then it may prevent the heart from pumping properly. So you can have problems with small tumors. You can have problems with tumors. It all depends on where they are. But if they're in your non-essential parts of your body, like your fat cells, then they're not going to cause you much problem, right? So tumors are not a cancer because those cells, they stay at home. Think about it, right? They are born under your skin, say skin cancer, skin tumor, use the right word. And the tumor will just grow and grow under your skin. It doesn't go anywhere, right? So they're called benign tumors. Benign means unable to travel and set up a new colony in your body, right? They don't invade other tissue. They are restricted to the layer of tissue in which they were originally present, the original cell, right? So they can't go into blood. They can't go into fat. They can't go into the liver or your brain. They can't grow there, okay? But cancers can. Cancers are cells that have the ability to burrow down or around into new tissue that's alien to them, right? So a skin cancer can go deep into your tissue under your skin and then into your blood vessels and then maybe elsewhere in your body. And when it gets there, the cells break off and they travel all over your body and they can get out of those blood vessels and they can set up colonies, lots of them. And then you get secondary tumors, right? So that process of being able to leave home some of the cells and set up a new colony is called metastasis. Yeah, metastasis. It means from Greek spread, to spread, right? To spread uncontrollably. So that's the word that you don't want to hear, right? Both of those words, malignant tumor, that means a cancerous tumor that can spread or has spread, and metastasis is the process of spreading. So where do cancers come from? Why does our body have cells that go out of control? Well, I'll tell you the answer is that in all cancers, there are defects in the DNA. The DNA of those cells is defective. What causes the DNA to become defective? What's the reason why the DNA becomes defective, right? Well, sometimes it's natural. You know, the DNA is copying itself and it makes a mistake. But we're not looking at that. That's very rare. Your body's very good at producing new DNA without many mistakes. So how do we explain the majority of cancers? Well, the bottom of this slide tells you. So some of them come from the type of food that you eat. Others come from the water contamination that may be around you, right? And others are caused by viruses and bacteria. So basically, your lifestyle will be responsible for most of the cancers that we see in the human population, right? So what do we mean by food? Well, the other day, my son made some barbecue. He went to a relative's house where they were cooking a barbecue, and he came back and he bought this chicken. And the chicken had been charred on the corners. And I told him that if we were to eat that chicken, we would be risking developing certain types of cancers. So he asked me why. I told him that barbecued food is alien to our bodies because it's been cooked under such high heat that the chemistry of the food, the proteins, the sugars, and the fats, they become altered with the heat from the stove, from the barbecue. And the charring is a result of unnatural chemical formation. And when you eat that charred chicken, you're introducing those chemicals into your bloodstream. Those chemicals are going to wash around your entire body. They're going to maybe penetrate some cells. And when they get into those cells, they're going to irritate the DNA. They're going to bind to the DNA. They're going to change the DNA, which is the basis of mutation, and therefore the beginning of potential cancer formation. Okay. So that's how things develop, right? Now, some types of foods, they can give you cancer, not because they've been overcooked, simply because of where they come from, right? So there are some types of grains like peanuts and wheat, if they're not stored properly, a fungus grows on top of that type of food in those silos, right? And if the food is not stored properly, the fungus will grow and it will produce a toxin. And the toxin is very long lasting. So when that grain is sold to the community to make bread or to make something else, and it's consumed, those toxins are still there. And they then enter your body and go and irritate your DNA because they bind to the DNA and they cause mutations, right? So there's many, many cases of this, and there's a big breakout in China last decade where thousands of people got cancer from eating contaminated food because of the fungi, right? So there's many, many examples, and we don't have time to go into it all, but you get the idea, right? So be careful with the type of food you eat. Processed meat, meat that contains preservatives like bacon and salami, right? Be careful with that because those preservatives are proven, they have been proven to increase the rate of cancer in experimental and natural conditions. Right? Experimental means in the lab, working on mice and stuff like that, and natural means in the population of humans. Water contamination, let's look at that. So pure water doesn't cause cancer, right? But water that's contaminated may. So in Turlock, we do know that the water that's in the ground, underground water, groundwater, is contaminated. What is it contaminated with? Well, in the case of Turlock, the gas stations in the past used to leak. And they used to have some additives in the gas that used to prevent cars from doing various kinds of engine noises, right? And those chemicals are long-lasting chemicals, almost forever chemicals. They get into the groundwater, they seep down underneath the gas station into the soil and then into the aquifers, right, under Turlock. So Turlock has one of the highest levels of this chemical in the country, and it's borderline EPA dangerous. So be careful drinking well water in Turlock, right, for the time being. And this problem has been going on for decades. It's not going to get any cleaner very soon. So that chemical does the same thing, enters your blood, irritates your DNA. All right, so there's many other examples of that. Then infections, well, what comes to mind are, other than these fungi that we spoke about a few minutes ago, HPV, human papillomavirus, Epstein-Barr virus, right? So certain types of viruses, HIV, certain types of viruses, their life cycle, the way that they reproduce these viruses, it entails them attaching to our DNA. And when they do, they can cause mutations, a change in our DNA. Now, the coronavirus doesn't do that because of its life cycle. It's very similar to the cold virus. It's a cousin of the cold virus. It doesn't do that. So we're not expecting to see a spike in cancers as a result of the pandemic, right? So that's good news on that side. But there are certain bacteria that release toxins, and those toxins can bind to our DNA and cause mutations, right? So anything that causes the DNA to increase the mutation rate will be a carcinogen, a chemical that causes cancer, carcinogen. So radiation, right? We're talking about Ukraine right now and the Russians. Well, Chernobyl, the decommissioned power station that blew up in the 1980s, that is in northern Ukraine, but they have the largest nuclear power plant in the south of Ukraine, near the Black Sea. And that has recently fallen into Russian hands, right? But the Russians know how dangerous it is, so they are looking after it. But the people that lived around the power station in Ukraine that were exposed to the radiation, they developed higher levels of cancers than other people. So radiation can also cause cancer. Can you prevent cancer? The answer is no. Doesn't matter where you live on this planet. There's certain types of radiation that comes from the cosmos outside the planet that can go right through the planet and right through you and carry on into Jupiter, that type of radiation can also jiggle our DNA and cause it to lose its chemistry and introduce mutations. So you can't stop DNA damage. You can minimize it, but you can't stop it. So I stole this from the pages of our books, right? You can see there's a normal cell, it divides in two, right? So that's what we expect, on demand when necessary. Then suppose later on, one of the daughter cells, so this is the mother cell, and the mother has two daughter cells, right? Say one of the daughter cells sustains a mutation. So the mutation means that it's potentially cancerous, right? So this is another thing. You can't develop cancer in one step. You can't be normal today and tomorrow you're cancer. No, cancer is a multi-step process. It's like a staircase. Only when you get to the top are you a cancer cell, right? You start at the bottom, a healthy cell. Then you take these steps up the staircase. And every step is leading towards cancer, right? So that's what you need to understand. So cancer, you can't get in one day, right? But suppose this cell has a defect, and over time it multiplies and multiplies and it increases the number of defects. Eventually, it'll become a tumor, right? And the tumor may be benign, i.e. that it can't spread anywhere else. Or it'll become a tumor that's metastatic. It's a malignant tumor, right? So the top half of this would be a cancer, and the bottom half would just be a normal tumor, a benign tumor. And you can see the top half, the cells are beginning to move, right? They're beginning to travel. And when those cells travel to distant locations, then we have metastasis. Now you have the original cancer, and now you have cells breaking away constantly, setting up new colonies all over the body. Eventually, something will give in your body, right? Either mechanically, i.e. the cancer is growing in the wrong place, or biochemically, the cancer is releasing chemistry that's interfering with the rest of your body. One or the other will then kill the patient, right? So we're going to learn about that. So we're going to focus in on that one cell, the original cell that became defective. We're going to look at why it becomes defective and what we can do to minimize the chance of that cell becoming cancerous, right? So here's another question for right now. And I'm going to give you a chance to ask me questions in a few minutes, right? So let me answer that while I open this. Could there be a correlation between cancer rates and regions that import most of their food? I don't know the direct answer, so I'm going to just speculate from what I do know. We do know that in countries that get lots of food coming in from outside, like Ethiopia, where they have a famine, they can't grow their own food, or not much of it, then they rely on food coming in from other places, right? Depending on what's going on in that other place, like Bangladesh or India or China, right? Then they can inherit the toxins that are coming in with the rice, say, right? So the level of cancer in that community in Ethiopia will go up because they're now getting rice that's contaminated from the source from which it came, rather than their own rice that they've had in the last couple of thousand years. So there is a correlation, yes, with the import of food. Yeah, so good point there, all right? So let's look at the answer to this question. So 77% of you got the right answer, right? So that's the difference between a normal growth and cancer cells. All right, well done. Let's carry on, right? Let's go a bit faster. We have a few minutes. So where was I? We were just looking at cancer cells. So traveling around, how do they get around? Well, sometimes they can burrow through the tissue. They can move other cells out of the way because they have that ability. That's one of the defects that they get, right? They get a ability to change their behavior, and they can burrow their way through a population of cells. The second thing they can do is they can enter the bloodstream, and the bloodstream is a fast-moving fluid, right? So very quickly they can be taken to all parts of the body within minutes. But they can also enter another channel system called the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system is a slow-moving canal. So cancer can escape very quickly using the blood and less quickly using the lymphatic system to many regions of the body. All right. But the cells that enter the blood, they find themselves in a very alien environment. It's like going to Mars, right? As a human. You are unlikely to live in the blood. So most of the cells from the tumor that are leaking into the blood vessel will die. Unless, by luck, one of them has the right chemistry to survive in the blood. That is the beginning of your problems. But it's not your problem yet, because that cell has to leave the blood somewhere else and enter a new alien environment, like another solar system, right? And it has to get out there, out of the blood, go through the blood vessel, and then enter and live inside this new tissue and start to multiply. That's when you get your secondary tumors. That's when you get metastasis, right? Or metastasis. And that's bad news, because if one cell can do it, the chances are other cells can do it too. And if that one cell can do it when it has babies, those cells can do it too. So they all have a additive effect, right? So these cells in general, we're going to look at that next. These cells in general, are able to reproduce when they shouldn't, right? They're able to invade surrounding tissues when they shouldn't. And they're able to move to new locations in the body when they shouldn't. So these are the shouldn't cells, right? Normally the immune system takes care of them, or they commit suicide once they start listening, stop listening to the signals around them. But cancer cells have evaded those two mechanisms. So quite recently, a patient was sharing with me that they were stage 3. And some of you were sharing in the chat about relatives and friends that were different stages. Stage 4 came up the most common. So what are these stages? Well, this is an attempt by the medical community to diagnose the level of infiltration of the body by the cancer, right? So let's have a look very quickly. So stage 1, and of course, the lower the number, the better the news, right? But it doesn't mean that all the time. You can have stage 1 pancreatic cancer, and that can be devastating, right? Or you can have stage 4, let's have a look. You can have stage 4, I'm looking for cancer that's stage 4, but not deadly. You can have a stage 4 sarcoma, a bone cancer, right? Of a certain type, that won't kill you. So these are just arbitrary, not arbitrary, but very loosey-goosey types of classifications, right? So here we have a graphic to go along with this, right? So stage 1, with the cancer, it's itself quite small, made of a limited number of cells, right? And it hasn't spread to other parts of the body, including the lymph nodes. So lymph nodes are part of the lymphatic system. They're like rest stops along the highway, right? So the highway is the lymphatic system, and they're like rest stops where you can rest. So these lymph nodes are full of white blood cells. That's where the white blood cells of your body spend most of their time, socializing in lymph nodes, right? So lymph nodes are very important for your immune health. So everywhere in your body, you have lymph nodes, right? So if the cancer is not present in the lymph nodes, the nearest lymph node to where it is, then that's going to be stage 1, right? Good news, very good news. Stage 2 is where either the size of the cancer is more than 5 centimeters, which is about 1.5 inches, almost 2 inches, right? And or that some of the lymph nodes are infiltrated by a cancer. So the nearest lymph nodes, a few of them, right, are infiltrated. So one or the other, right? So that's going to be stage 2. So the cancer is beginning to travel now a little bit. Stage 3 is when the cancer is quite large and the lymph nodes more distant, i.e. a few inches away rather than a few centimeters. A few inches or more away are showing signs of infiltration, right? You have to do a biopsy to find out if those lymph nodes are contaminated with cancer cells. So that's going to be stage 3. Not good news. Stage 4 is when the cancer has been detected by a PET scan or some other type of scan, growing in another place inside the patient. You can see it, there it is, and there it is over there too, right? Or there it is, and there it is in 15 other places. That's going to be stage 4. The cancer has established colonies elsewhere in the body. So that's a very, very, like I said, a very liberal way of looking at it, but that's what doctors share with the patient. The doctors themselves have a more robust way of measuring cancer that will make sense to this class, so we don't even think about it, right? So the first time my wife had cancer, to stage 1, although the doctors thought it was stage 3. He made a mistake, right? So it was stage 1. The second time she had cancer, it was the second time was stage 1. The third time she had cancer, to stage 3B, right? So it wasn't just in her breast, it wasn't in her lymph nodes, which were all matted together like a solid lump. That's what made her suspicious, because her armpit was like a solid lump, the whole thing. And then the cancer was found in her collarbone region, right? Near her neck. So from there to there to here. So that was stage 3. But they didn't find it in any of the organs, which was really good news. So good news for her, right? So they didn't call it stage 4. Had they found it in a lung or in a liver, then it would be stage 4. But these days they have stage 4A, stage 4B, stage 4C, etc., etc. So they're becoming more definitive in the way that they classify cancer. But like I said, they have other ways of classifying cancer that we don't need to know about, right? So I stole this from another book that I teach from, and I like the graphic, right? So there we go. Look, stage 1, the cancer is small and it's just in the breast tissue. Stage 2, the cancer is quite large now, right? And it's not present in any of the lymph nodes, but it's still quite large. It's larger than this one. Stage 3, it's large and it's moving into the lymph nodes in that part of the body, right? So beyond the breast. And stage 4, you can see it, you can see the lung in the background, right? That's how big your lungs are. Yeah. So this is your right left lung, right? Right lung. The patient's right lung. So you can see the little spots there. Those are cancers, as well as the original one, right? So that this is infected, the lymph nodes are infected, and then the lung has at least 4 secondary growths. So that's going to be stage 4. Right. So here's a summary of that, same information. And here's a very simple chart that measures the size and the location of the cancer and the number of lymph nodes that are involved, right? So this is basically the same. I added on A and B and A and B on here. This is a more diverse classification of cancer. But if you break this down, it sort of matches this previous slide, right? So yeah, the doctors would use this, and even more than this if they had to. So are there any questions from before we go to the next question, are there any questions from the class? Are there any questions from the class that I can answer about staging or what I've said so far today? So yeah, I told you it's pretty depressing, right? But we'll have good news for you on Thursday. Yes? So let's get through the last couple of questions and then we'll let you go. So here's your next question for today, please. So you're the doctor, read the diagnosis there and then determine the stage of cancer for this patient. Breast cancer tumor is detected, that is about 2 centimeters in size, and has only moved into lymph nodes associated with the breast, but not beyond. What stage would you classify this cancer as? Doctor, what do you think? I have 80% of the class agreeing, right? Is that the right answer though? No! Only 2% of you got the right answer. Why? Because I didn't emphasize something, right? That's my fault, not yours. I didn't emphasize on the previous slide, I didn't emphasize the size, right? I sort of mentioned it very quickly. So here they are. So small means less than 2 centimeters. Medium means about 2 centimeters, and large means above 5 centimeters, right? Centimeter. So what is a centimeter? It's about what? Almost 3/4 of an inch. That's what a centimeter is, right? So you can see 5 centimeters is about 2 inches. So these are pretty big masses. So if you knew that, then you, of course, you'll get the right answer, because this is a small tumor and it hasn't spread. So stage 2, except to the lymph nodes, right? So, all right. Okay, let's leave it there, right? And then we'll go and look at risk factors and finish off the biology all on Thursday. We'll go much faster. We won't have to get stuck learning about cancer. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, folks. Stay positive.
Professor, I'm curious about something.
Okay, go ahead.
So on the beginning of the semester, you mentioned about like drinking either in tap water or like drinking in bottled water, right? And then you said that you're more kind of like reliable in drinking out of tap water. So if that's so, and like what you mentioned today, that since there's like a history of like the gas something in the pipe, or do you think it's still safe to drink in the tap?
What that's the good news, right? Because the bottle company don't have to report anything, right? They don't have to tell you if their plastic is getting into the water, right? They don't have to tell you any of that. They don't have to tell you when you undo the cap that parts of the plastic in the cap fall into the water, right? They don't have to share that with you because they have to tell you nothing. But the water company has to tell you the real truth all the time, so that you can now have the knowledge to decide what to do, right?
Okay.
So that's the good news, right? So wherever you are in the country, the water company has to tell you what they found every time they test the water, which is twice a day.
Okay.
Right? So things can change. In the future, the water in Turlock may become beautiful, and they'll keep telling you that, right? So now you know what the water is like, because they have to publish that data. Yes? You go to their website and look at it.
Yes.
And you can decide for yourself, hey, I don't think it's safe. I won't get bottled water because I think it'll be safer, right? Or I'll get my water from somewhere else. So that's the good news.
I
don't live in Turlock.
I'll go ahead and do my research.
I don't live in Turlock. I live in Oakville. And I checked the water here. It's pretty clean. So I will keep drinking the tap water.
Yeah.
Do you see that?
Okay. Yes. I'll go ahead and search up on my CD.
Thank you. Thank you. That's what we want you to do. Become empowered.